sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality. My name is Megan Bonner, and joining me as always is my wonderful co-host Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And joining us today is Dr. Kristin Lassiter. Hello.
Hello.
And would you like to introduce yourself and why you're here?
Sure. So I'm Kristin Lassiter, and I'm a reproductive psychiatrist here in Austin, Texas. And I'm here to talk about psychiatry having to do with women's mental health and hopefully getting some education out there about that.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, great. Glad to have you here. We're super excited to jump into the interview and definitely want to hear from anybody who might have questions about postpartum depression, about any of the mental health concerns that go into pregnancy and early pediatrics and just everything associated with the crazy roller coaster ride of hormones and body changes and everything else that comes along those lines.
And if you would like to call in, the phone number is 512-686-0279, and we do have lines open, so please give us a call. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so moving into everything else, I think we're ready to go ahead and jump on the phones.
If you would like to, we can definitely do that. Let's go ahead. And Rod, you are on the air.
Good evening, guys. How you guys doing?
Yeah, not too bad. What's on your mind?
Well, basically, so for the last 6 months, I've been doing consistent research in the religious origins of modern-day customs and traditions that currently, in phase with modern-day society. And
okay, who's underlining your thesis? It sounds like a pretty big thing to take on.
Well, it's an online project. I run a channel, and it's a project I've been working on in regards to. It's a long story.
Fair enough.
But basically, actually, ironically, this week I ran into the subject in research in regards to the religious origins in regards to the subject of gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to get feedback from you guys in reference to your own experiences. And it's very ironic that you have the individual, Christine, if I remember correctly, that maybe you can throw at her opinion, because I would love to hear it in regards to, the origins of regards to reproductive rights and stuff. And I would love to get her feedback in relation to, what she's seen from her professional perspective of the origins of modern day traditions and stuff. That would be amazing if I can get feedback on that as well.
Yeah, so these are huge topics with really big questions and question marks that go with them,
and a lot of subcategories even under them. So it's very broad.
I would say that there are books and books and books written on the subject, but I guess I'm wondering if there's a particular question or anything we might be able to clarify, or even just jump in with our own experience.
Well, let me ask you this. So here's a very simple question.
Mm-hmm.
In relation to this subject, what do you guys feel is the biggest influences on the subject of gender? That's what I'm hitting on this week. What is the biggest concept or basic origins that you feel are literally impacting modern-day society in regards to the concepts of gender? If I can get your guys' opinion on that.
Sure. So if we're talking modern day, of course, you're looking at Christianity or the early beginnings of Christianity, of Judaism.
The effect of the Abrahamic religions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's Abrahamic
that
religions.
Sure.
And everything that stemmed from it definitely sets the tone for what is commonly seen now as, or perceived, I should say, as being the genders. I will say that before the Abrahamic religions, many of the religions and civilizations before that recognized multiple genders, and not just 2 or 3, but 7, 9, 20 different genders, depending on the culture that you are looking into. And so I did want to just get that out there, that the idea of the 2 genders really did not cement itself until the Abrahamic religion came in and kind of, spread itself across the globe.
Yeah. So when we're looking at kind of the influence of religion now, I mean, we can sort of trace back those roots and talk about how particularly the Abrahamic religions are probably tied to trying to guarantee paternity because of the advent of agriculture and trying to pass on land and ownership and the family name and all of these sorts of concepts. And we can unpack that in a lot of different ways. I would maybe point you towards Alpha God by Dr. Hector Garcia, who has been on the show, and we've talked with him before about the influence of...
His name is Hector Garcia. I'm writing this down.
Yeah, Hector Garcia. It'll be in the footnotes to the episode, but he's also been on our show and has some great things to say. But stepping into what we're looking at now, particularly the Christian Bible, as we're talking about, Western Hemisphere, Western civilization, is incredibly influential and says pretty clearly in Genesis and John and some other places about how male and female God created them, about how God created man, he took part of man, he created woman, and it's very, very clear.
I have issues, but that's a whole nother thing.
Well, it's very clear in the Bible about this idea that there's man and there's woman, and that's it. Those are the two options. Those are the two opportunities. And so a lot of folks now that are tasked with recognizing and accepting people who have divergent gender expressions or viewpoints are just thumping right on that. It's simple, it's in God's word, it's right there. And it allows them to avoid thinking overly much about it, having to really dive into it. Because if you dive into it, if you start looking at genetics, if you start understanding the science behind it, you realize that gender or sex is much more complicated than a simple male-female switch. It's not just a 0
Two
or
boxes.
a 1. Yeah, it's much more sophisticated, but people are avoiding conflict. They don't want to get into complexity. They don't want to read. Their world is confusing and complicated enough, and so it's really easy to just say, well, this ancient book that I've decided to live my whole life by, says very clearly this, and they stick with that. And if you start rocking that boat, then the whole Bible starts to fall apart. These concepts of male domination, which is very clearly throughout the Bible in many, many ways and many, many places, that starts to fall apart. If there's no man and woman, then who's dominating who? And if I'm not dominating you, then our whole power structure falls apart.
Occasionally I like to dominate, but that's a whole other story.
It's a whole other story. So, yeah, that's the greatest Cliff Notes I can give you.
One of the things I wanted to mention is throughout my research, I've been reading several books over the last 2 or 3 days in relation to the origins of gender, like you're mentioning in regards to religious origins. Something that I found very intriguing is you guys probably know the religious origins of the Abrahamic faiths came from the basic concepts of Zoroastrianism. Mm-hmm. And throughout my reading, I came to discover that the very first concepts of a male and female concepts of modern-day gender that we would describe today actually came in origins from Zoroastrianism. This is yet another thing that the Abrahamic faiths actually, I wouldn't say ripped off because that's a little bit too abrasive, but more lines of acquired or appropriated this belief structure. Now, the other thing I was going to mention is, so this is a very important part. So I'm an atheist myself. I've been an atheist for about 5 years, and unfortunately, I'm going to be very blunt. I'm a left-wing individual, and I don't want to go into politics here. But one of the things I've been seeing in regards to a lot of the people within the secular community across social media is they seem to tend to have a hard time letting go of these preconceptions they had growing up in these religious structures. I'd love to see, what do you think are the major reasons why people tend to have a hard time letting go of these concepts, even when they themselves claim to be a non-believer today? This is not to mean they don't actually believe in a God, because I think they do, but why do you think it's so hard for these individuals to let go of these past teachings that they are so imbued into their psyche, even today as non-believers? Do you guys have any opinions on that?
I know I do. As a non-professional, I do know that the way that the brain develops, if you are introduced to these ideas and, myths early on, it does root itself in your mind. And the older we get, the older we get, the harder it is for us to change.
The more set you are in that. I think
set
when
in your ways, as it were.
Yeah, if you start talking to any high schooler, you start to realize that idea that, people just can't expand their minds or that they're stuck thinking in this particular way starts to fall apart, because anytime I talk to anybody under 20, I'm actually shocked at how they're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's only when you've been told one thing for so long, and whether you have a formal religious belief system or not, you're still being told that. You're still getting the rub off of these institutions and these ideas that, our government is influenced by our population is influenced by religion influences our government in these huge, huge ways, and right down to the way that when people are born, they're handed oftentimes a birth certificate with 2 check boxes, and it starts off that simply. I don't know, Kristin, what your role has ever been in, going through the delivery process or even just checking off those boxes, but it often is just as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And especially, even when children are born, with kind of ambiguous genitalia or things, they make the parent pick a gender for the child. And
certainly nobody's doing a genetic test to look at what their actual chromosomal DNA says.
Well, usually they do nowadays. They have a genetic test telling them whether it's male or female. But oftentimes it's kind of up to the parents to decide in that moment whether or not.
And as we well know, that doesn't always properly determine the eventual gender of the human being.
Right, what they feel like.
Gender and sex, obviously very different.
If I may just interject real quick, I really would love to ask this, because it's really amazing that you guys actually have a professional psychiatrist on board. Miss Christina, if I may ask you out of respect, I know your expertise is in reproductive issues and stuff like that, but in your training, and when it comes to as a psychiatrist, is there throughout all your experiences and all your knowledge, is there a certain characteristics that innate comes from religiosity in regards to the psychological traits that an individual would have? In your professional, do you have any feedback in reference to that, ma'am?
Are you asking are women more communicative, men have more spatial reasoning, that sort of thing?
No, because I would love to hear. I would love to get because she is a psychiatrist. In her experiences, in her knowledge, in her opinion, does she feel like there is a psychological trait in regards to society or individuals within society that have withhold or grasp onto these concepts of gender? Is there some type of psychological, not because these people are mentally ill or around those lines, but just maybe a psychological facet to it that maybe she would have any feedback on? That would be amazing to hear if she would.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily specifically with gender, but I think, when we're growing up and when we're young, we kind of form a lot of our beliefs in very simplified ways. So a good example is, for a chair, when you're young, you call everything a chair that has 4 legs and a seat and a back. And it's only as you kind of, grow older that you learn to differentiate between different types of chairs versus couches and things like that. So it's kind of, we kind of grow up putting things in boxes, and it's hard to then change that in our mind later on, especially through experiences in our culture that separates out things such as gender. Then eventually, it kind of gets set in your mind that, well, this is how it was when I was younger, and these are the experiences that have reinforced that, and changing that gets to be a little more difficult, I think.
I did want to...
If I may ask, ma'am, do you feel that because of growing up in a religious environment, that it builds up like a certain persona, or not persona, that's the wrong word, but a certain characteristic that a lot of these individuals that even become secular later on in life, is there like a characteristic that these individuals could use to help possibly, change their viewpoints in regards to this at all? Is there any, like, not methodology, I'm trying to find the right words for it. Is there a good way to help an individual, try to help them break from these old habits or these old characteristics that they grew up with to, embrace what logic and, common sense would kind of like, point to? Is there any way that you can possibly think, ma'am, that would help in that process?
That's a very good question. I think if we had a way to change the way that people think and believe, that we'd probably make a lot of money doing that.
Yeah, like we have these things, but there's no magic answer, right?
Of course.
Right.
And I did want to say that along the lines of, why people think what they do and why they stick, as we say, stick to their guns so tightly, is because a lot of these concepts, when they are learned so early on, they become part of a person's self-identity. And so that when you attack this thing, what they see is you are attacking them. You're not attacking this nebulous, this concept. You are attacking them, the person. And so
they would feel like you're personally doing like an ad hominem to them. Mm-hmm. It's something that they've basically had a grasp on for so long.
Right.
They think it's a personal attack.
So I think it's important for us to, when we are having these discussions, mm-hmm. Sometimes they turn into arguments, but let's try and keep them as discussions, because the second they turn into an argument, it becomes defensive. When we are having these discussions, it's important to first differentiate the concept from the person and make sure that as you continue your conversation, it is clear that you are only questioning the concept. You're not questioning the person.
Individual. Gotcha.
And
attack the ideal, not the individual.
Correct. But most of the time when you attack, and I hate the word attack too, when you are questioning the idea, you need to make it very clear that you are not questioning the person.
Yeah, because there have been moments, I won't lie, that, I've had discussions with individuals that are, literally, we have similar viewpoints in regards to, theology, in regards to being secular and atheist, but I've had disagreements with individuals that had, it seemed like they had a hard time understanding the concept, for example, gender, concepts of, humanism and advocating for everyone for equal rights and, like feminism and stuff like that, how there's good and bad feminism depending on, how they use it and how, if they're attacking other people and doing bigotry themselves. And that's one of the hardest things that I have had to experience in speaking to these individuals in relation to their set ways, even if they have embraced a good portion of, just logical thought process. And that's one of the hardest things. I guess it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to get your guys' feedback in relation to this, because I had a previous experience with this. And, I've been trying to find, and there's no best way that I can imagine that I could ever approach this subject with someone. But I guess I'm trying to find the most, not convenient, I'm trying to find the right word. It's not convenient, but more on the lines of the best method to address this, any subject in relation to individuals that may still have this mind frame, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, a lack of belief in a God or just any level of questioning doesn't necessarily lend itself immediately to an appreciation for all of humanity and a
Absolutely.
Progressive ideal and like a respect for others. So it can get frustrating when it feels like it's so obviously right there that, taking care of everybody, rising tides and all boats and all of these sorts of things, that these would be important values with somebody that you think should share your ideas. So I recognize how aggravating that can be. But yeah, the simple answer is just that thinking is hard, and it's not unreasonable for people to not want to do it, to avoid doing it, especially when the status quo benefits them, which is very generally what we're talking about. We're talking usually about people who don't want to see social upheaval because they're at the top of the pile. You don't really see as much concern and hesitation and confusion with regards to race and gender and orientation among people who are in the margins. And so it's a privilege to not have to think. And so I can't hold it against anybody, but I kind of can too.
Well, see, I think that's, personally from my own experiences growing up in a very religious household and having, family that are still strongly religious, I can completely grasp what you just said, because it's just one of the hardest things, even for myself, researching theology and going into the origins of Christianity, reading the Bible at least 3 times over, and kind of getting the origins of the modern day concepts that we have in relation to traditions of gender, reproductive rights, and a whole slew of other things that, you grew up accepting to be the standard or the status quo of society. And then when you get this new information, it's like, well, that's not what I was brought up to believe. Then it kind of it doesn't hurt you, but it's like a shock to the system, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. It's a culture shock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would recommend going back into our episode catalog and watching the episode that we did with Dr. Hector Garcia.
Yeah,
definitely. I wrote that down, so I'm definitely I'm gonna go through. Do you guys know if he has a YouTube channel or at all in reference to, does he make any content?
He's got a pair of books worth checking out, and I'll also link to his website in the footnotes. He does not have his own podcast, but he's appeared on a number of both ACA shows and other YouTube shows and podcasts and things like that. So yeah, he's got a TED Talk out. I mean, he's out there. So it's definitely worth taking a look at his catalog.
Absolutely, because especially on the subject of my research in reference to the subject this week, mm-hmm. That's one thing I'm going to probably have to do, and probably look over his content, and I'm going to have to see if his books are available online or. Oh yeah,
I've gotten them both off of the Amazon store right on my Kindle, awesome. And it's a worthy read.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your information. Thank you, especially to Christine. I greatly appreciate a perspective from, a psychological perspective. So thank you very much for your guys' information. This has helped a lot in regards to my research. So.
Well, great.
Yeah, good luck on your project. Feel free to shoot us an email when you put something together. We're sex@atheist-community.org.
It's going to be at least a couple months, because, again, the entire symposium of my work is in regards to the religious origins of modern-day society. See, just to wrap this up, one of the things that I have a belief on, again, I have, this is, the evidence is iffy because I have to do a lot of research to back up my claims. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest things in regards to my own understandings growing up in a religious household and being an atheist today is a lot of people don't understand that a lot of the traditions, a lot of the origins we have today, especially in regards to politics and reproductive rights and a lot of those things, they're all based on some type of theology. Mm-hmm. And when you mention that to individuals, they have a hard time, if you speak about something that wouldn't look like it's based on theology, it actually is. So that's where that's why I'm working on this. So yeah, I'll try to keep you guys up to date on it.
Yeah, keep us updated. Shoot us an email, and thanks so much for calling in.
You too, guys. You guys take care, and thank you so much for the info.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's not wrong. I mean, we still say bless you when people sneeze. I mean, we say goodbye, which
I
is
try to
a
say
short
Parmesan, but sometimes I can't help myself. It's so ingrained that bless you.
Yeah. I have a friend who just had a baby, and there is something deeply human about sitting silent when a baby sneezes. Like, it just feels unnatural. It's just wrong. And so
because you're supposed to laugh.
Right? Well, so, baby sneezes like 15 months, so the whole body convulses. And so they've started saying hiya, which is just adorable. I love it. It works for me. But yeah, something else that came up during that discussion. So it is becoming common now to actually do a blood test and look at the genetics as a baby is born.
Yeah,
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, they actually do a blood test. I want to say it's like as early as 10 weeks when you're 10 weeks gestation, so 10 weeks pregnant. They can do a blood test and find out if they have any kind of genetic abnormalities and what gender they are. Yeah. Technology.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's not just looking at a grainy picture of what you think might be a penis anymore.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Well, that's helpful. So, Christy, you had a couple questions for her?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really just wanted to find out a little bit more about, what reproductive psychiatry even is. I mean, I have some ideas. There's a lot of hormones going on, and that's about as far as I get.
And of course, I was thinking it was the preconception portion of the whole process.
Oh, becoming like comfortable with fertility.
And everything. Yeah.
That is part of it.
Okay.
So I get this question all the time. So first of all, just to kind of explain psychiatry and psychology, because I feel like that's also a question that's asked a lot. So psychiatry are physicians who've gone to medical school and then kind of specialize in, psychiatric medicine, and then psychology, they go to graduate school and go on to get either a PhD or a PsyD. So I'm a psychiatrist, so went to medical school and then residency, and then in residency decided I wanted to do reproductive psychiatry, and essentially what that means is it's treating psychiatric illnesses that have to do with pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, any of those big hormonal shifts that women get to go through.
Fun stuff.
The fun stuff, but also kind of helping men too. So there's a lot of research that partners go through some postpartum depression. I think it's like 10%. So that's also involved in it.
What as you're going through residency, I mean, you're going all the way through pre-med and medical school, and what made you land on psychiatry and then reproductive psychiatry on top of that?
Yeah, so going into medical school, I actually thought I was going to be an OB-GYN. I'd worked for an OB-GYN for a year before going to medical school, and I told people, psychiatry would be the last thing I'll do. And I actually put it at the very end of my rotations in med school. And then I got to it and I loved it. And at that point in medical school, a lot of people go through a big period of burnout in medical school, and they've done research on how your empathy drops, and you just kind of lose a sense of yourself in a way. And so I was at that point in my medical school career where I really wanted to focus more on lifestyle and having a life outside of work. And psychiatry was both fascinating to me and could also give me kind of a different life other than just work.
Yeah, you're not rounding at a hospital and different things.
Right.
Well, what's the need for a psychiatrist who specializes so much? I mean, why is somebody who has already gotten their MD in psychiatric care not well suited or not best suited to take care of these kinds of issues? So
I think that's a difficult question, because I think there are some psychiatrists who are very comfortable caring for women during pregnancy and postpartum with breastfeeding. But I think that these women often fall in a gap in that the OB-GYNs aren't necessarily trained on how to manage psychiatric illnesses, and the psychiatrists aren't necessarily trained on how to manage medications during pregnancy. And so they fall into this void where both of their physicians are saying, no, go to the psychiatrist, no, go to your OB-GYN. so it's nice to have somebody who feels comfortable with both aspects. And I think that more and more psychiatry residencies are training people on how to be comfortable with medications and pregnancy. But when I was in training, that wasn't necessarily a common thing, and I think it's just now starting to get more common. But, the OB-GYNs would maybe get an hour lecture their whole residency on mental illness, and the psychiatrists would maybe get, an hour lecture on reproductive mental health. And so, unfortunately, these women kind of fall in a crack where no one wants to treat them.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't want to so much as they don't feel comfortable.
Right. They don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, just as a therapist, anytime I hear from a client that they are taking a antidepressant or any other psychiatric type medication that's prescribed by a general practitioner, that's a little bit of a red flag. It's not necessarily a bad idea, but it is concerning because you do want somebody who's got that specialization. And I guess I really value that there is somebody who's covering something that I think has been really overlooked and misread in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, having a primary care doctor being able to manage psychiatric medications is great because there are a huge, void of psychiatrists in the United States. But, when you're getting into pregnancy and then you're not only treating the woman, you're treating the baby, and you kind of have a lot of other safety issues that are there. I think it's important to have somebody who can understand all the risks and benefits of using those medications and the effects that it's going to have on the baby.
Yeah. That being the case, do you talk to a lot of people who, maybe their pediatrician or their OB-GYN or some other provider has dramatically misread things or prescribed something that is unsafe or, undertreated or misdiagnosed?
Yes, I've had patients who have come to me who, they were stable on an antidepressant for years. They got pregnant, and then, we've already discussed, hey, this is fine to use in pregnancy. Here are the risks, but, it's better than the risks of not being on the medication.
Sure.
And then they come to me saying, no, my OB-GYN told me it's not safe to take. Mm-hmm. Or I have patients who come in and they've tried probably 10 different antidepressants during the pregnancy, rather than just going to the one that had originally worked because there wasn't research on that. And so, and that's very unsafe too. So there's a lot of things that kind of go on that, aren't necessarily the best practice, and not because they mean anything bad by it, but just because there's kind of, like I said, the education isn't there.
Yeah. How are patients supposed to manage all of these gaps? I mean, if you are going through pregnancy and you're already dealing with the incredible stress and expense that's associated with that and insurance and everything else, and then you're trying to manage all of these different doctors and make sure everybody's on the same page, what can people watching or what can anybody be doing in order to get the right type of care?
That's a great question. There are a lot of organizations out there that can kind of help women get the care that they need, or at least kind of send them in the right direction or provide them with some education. So in Austin, we have a really great organization called the Pregnancy and Postpartum Health Alliance, where anyone can, go on the website or call them, and they have great coordinators who will kind of work with them to figure out, okay, what's the best need for you right now? Do you need someone, to speak with in terms of a therapist? Do you need a doula who kind of specializes in dealing with women with mental health issues? Or do you need a psychiatrist? And they're really great at kind of pointing them in the right direction. There's also an international organization called, now I'm going to forget it, Postpartum Support International.
Okay.
Which is also, good at kind of pointing people in the right direction, giving them a lot of education on what to look out for.
Navigating all of that.
Right. Helping them have the tools to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I know this is naive, but the older I get, the more I realize how ridiculous this model of going to the family doctor for everything is, not just in the sense of one person doing it all, but the idea that you could just go to the health store and get the health that you need, you just go and one-stop shop. Now it feels like people need to have an associate's in healthcare in order to navigate their own treatment.
Unfortunately, I think that's the case for some people. I think for most generally healthy people, having that one person that they can go to for everything is a great model. Mm-hmm. But I think when you are dealing with other comorbidities, other issues, health-wise, one person can't know everything. And so being able to kind of go to different people who have specialties in those areas and
navigate all that.
Right.
Okay, well, great. We will definitely put links to PPHATX on the footnotes.
.org.
Yeah, put all their information up as well as the international organizations and get all of that in the footnotes for everybody who'd like to take a look. In the meantime, do you want to jump back on the phones?
That sounds like a great idea. Let's go to Pine Snake. You are on the air.
Hey, Christine.
Hey.
I wanted to get your thoughts and any suggestions that you might have on a situation. Mm-hmm. If a couple are into a new relationship and one of the partners in a previous relationship had been abused, whether it be gaslighting or physically or anything like that, how would you suggest that the new partner would act so that they can support the new partner? And how would you suggest that the partner that was abused tries to move on and embrace the new relationship, as it could be really healthy for them?
Oh, that's a big box to unpack.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that is the question.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't want to overextend the word abuse or oversimplify it, but I also think it's worth noting that all of these things really exist on a spectrum, right? We're all hurt, traumatized, damaged, however you want to frame it, in various ways and to various degrees. And so we're all coming into new relationships with that baggage and trying to figure out how to support one another and heal each other's hurts and just be good people despite what we've gone through. So on the one hand, it's kind of the same experience for everybody, but certainly there are people who have had it a lot worse and who are struggling much more. So while I want to try and give like some good tips and things for dealing with that, I also want to just kind of acknowledge that we're all damaged in some format. And so I wouldn't say that, well, this is how I have my relationship with somebody who has PTSD, or this is how I have a relationship with somebody who was abused, or, over box things in that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
That being said, would you, because of the way that Christy phrased his answer, could you elaborate on maybe what type of trauma this person might be experiencing, so we can kind of help, narrow down?
Yeah.
Well, I've got a couple of friends that are in a new relationship with each other. One of them, in early teenage, pre-teen as well, had a serious sexual assaults done against them. Mm-hmm. And then moving forward into like late teens, early 20s, had a physically abusive partner who was also into the gaslighting and all the psychological torment that goes along with that. So there is severe PTSD involved, and they don't know how to. They don't know how to open up to the new partner, and the new partner also doesn't know how to support them, especially at difficult times when certain abuses first started happening and things like that. And they just feel like they're in the way and numb and things like that.
Yeah, that type of early and then chronic abuse can really shape somebody's personality. How do you handle that kind of thing?
Hey, that's a great question. I think when someone is really dealing with PTSD, so, very severe trauma, and the trauma has impacted their life in terms of how they interact with other people and their beliefs and how they interact with the world, I think at that point, really doing therapy is necessary to kind of get back the life than they deserve. From a psychiatric standpoint, medications can also help, but people who have been traumatized like that, really being able to work through that trauma and the way that they interact with people tends to be the most effective way. And it's hard supporting people through that. So it's not an easy journey. And to be in a relationship with somebody who has been traumatized means that you really kind of have to be understanding and meet them where they're at and helping them get through it.
And to her point, I want to say this isn't like a one conversation and done thing. This is a long-term therapy situation.
Yeah, that was the thing that really came to my mind was just the patience and the fortitude that goes into a relationship like that, where it is just being constantly supportive and I think more than anything accepting, having to just take it on the chin kind of over and over and over and not, shaking somebody and saying, it's so simple, it's so obvious, why can't you see, being patient with somebody and recognizing that their worldview has been dramatically altered by these experiences and they're not going to see what to you might seem so obvious and clear. And it's going to take just incredible amounts of patience to slowly change that perspective, which is exhausting oftentimes. And somebody who's in that type of relationship can get really worn out. And not only that, but people who have been abused often are put in positions where they feel they have to fight back. And so they can become abusive towards a partner who is nothing but wonderful to them, just out of a sense of desperation and experience and practice, I guess.
And I will speak from experience. When we're talking about a long journey, I have been seeing a wonderful therapist for about 2 years now. And I am definitely further along than I was even a year ago. I am a completely different person in a good way. But my journey's not done, and I recognize that, and it's been 2 years. So I think the most important thing is to fully grasp how long this journey truly will be.
Okay. Patience and understanding sounds like the advice that's being given.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Yeah, and everything that goes into preparing yourself for that, in order to be patient, in order to just be forgiving and to keep going, you got to make sure you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're
taking
exercising.
care of yourself.
Yeah, you're having fun, you're going out, you're doing the things that you need to do in order to have the strength and energy to do that kind of thing, because it can become a full-time job, which is too draining to take on.
Yeah, that's something I'll definitely need to pass on to at least one of them. Healthy eating.
Yeah, it's amazing how simple making sure to eat 3 to 5 times a day, sleep, 7 to 9 hours a day, working out 2 to 3 or 4 times a week. I mean, that simple recipe can solve, I don't know, maybe 50% of the types of things people come into a psychiatrist or
definitely
counselor's office for. Yeah, so that's the place to start. That's the low-hanging fruit. And then from there, just whatever else you need to keep the lights on.
Patience, love, and support.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thank you for your input and giving what sounds like common sense advice that I'm surprised people haven't thought about. Just mention it to them previously.
Well, anything we can do, and if you have questions later about it, let us know.
To be honest with you, what I'll do is I'll actually try and get them to call on themselves so they can give a more in-depth description of what's happening.
Sure, that would be great.
They do watch the show now, but they don't have the confidence to ring up just yet.
Sure. Well, and as Kristin said, getting into a therapist's office feels pretty vital, maybe even talking to a psychiatrist in that process. But yeah, we'd love to speak to them as well if there's anything we can do. So thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah, Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for taking the call.
We'll talk to you later.
You will.
Bye.
On Discord.
Yes, Pine Snake is one of our wonderful volunteers. He does so much. So yes.
Moderating our Discord channel in addition to some other things, which I guess just serves as a great reminder that as proud as we are of this show, it of course is part of the Atheist Experience Network, which is just another part of the ACA with the newsletter and Discord and Facebook and all of these great places. So in addition to calling this show, here it is. The number on your screen
is 512-686-0279.
Because we would love to continue to hear your questions as we continue the interview, but also checking out some of the other things that the ACA has to offer.
And I guess with that, we can get back to the conversation, unless you wanted to hear about my little jaunt to AACon.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of skipped over that. You were gone last week, went up to Cleveland? Cincinnati.
They both start with a C, and they're both in Ohio. It's all good.
Yeah, it means nothing to me at all.
Cleveland just would have been an extra 4 hours to our trip. But we drove. Actually, half of us flew and half of us drove up to Cincinnati, Ohio, for the American Atheist National Convention. And it was amazing. We had a table for the ACA. We met so many amazing people. I personally met so many amazing people. Many of you are fans of the show, which is awesome. Thank you guys so much for telling me your stories and letting me be part of your life for a little while. That was awesome. But with that, I guess we'll get back to the interview.
Yeah, glad to hear it was a good time.
Yeah.
So I guess, Kristin, I really, when we're talking about all of this, it makes me wonder why you've gone through this whole process, right? Because it's such a labor of love to get through medical school and then to, pick a profession that I understand has a little bit better scheduling than working at a hospital. Still, I have to wonder why put all of that energy and brain power to work in this particular way.
That's a very long drawn out answer than I could give.
Sure.
In medical school, I think this is a common thought, but I often wondered why am I doing this again? It's definitely tortuous and not fun. It has its great moments, but I'm not sure why I went through medical school. And sometimes, my husband and I have this talk a lot about whether or not we would do it again. And I think at this point I would, now that I'm finally here, but the journey was definitely difficult. But I think choosing a specialty or choosing a field that you can continue to learn in and continue to feel passionate about is really important. I know physician burnout is a huge thing right now. Physician suicide, I think physicians are the number one occupation for suicide rate right now. And I think part of that is just because we have been struggling for so long, and then we get involved in a field that, maybe we thought we would love and we don't, but we still have to keep struggling because we've already come this far.
Yeah, it's such a huge commitment, and it's not like you can get your hands dirty on your first day of pre-med. You have to get so deep into the process before you even meet a patient.
Right, and before you even know, is this what I like doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think for me personally, it was, kind of finding out where my interests lie on a very basic level. What do I like to study? What do I like to read about? And that was a lot to do with reproductive endocrinology. And then once I kind of got into psychiatry, it was, psychiatry is just so interesting, and it's a growing field that we are constantly learning more research about in terms of, our neurobiological processes and the brain and the central nervous system. So it's never dull and never boring for me, and I think that's what keeps me going, on top of being able to take care of patients and see good outcomes. If I didn't have that, I don't think then I would do it all over again either. Yeah,
with the, seeing those good outcomes, how hamstrung do you feel when it comes to, billing insurance and all of the asinine laws that Congress seems to be stumbling over? And I mean, it just feels like this is a very difficult time to be a doctor.
Yeah. I think with psychiatry, we get a lot of, critiques on most psychiatrists don't take insurance, or they don't work very long hours. And I think the reason is because of all of that, those paperwork and insurance. And I recently started taking insurance in my practice. I took one insurance, and I took the one that people said was the easiest to deal with. And I've already probably spent 40 hours just trying to figure out how to
Properly do the billing.
Yeah,
and I still
that.
haven't gotten reimbursed anything. It's kind of it's a double-edged sword that you want to help people, but at the same time, then you're punished for being more accessible.
Yeah, I know so many counselors that have it as a value to provide access, to make sure that care is available to these people, but the companies make it such a nightmare that it makes total sense why people would want to opt out of it.
Right. And it's kind of back what you said in terms of, when you're in a relationship with someone who's been traumatized, taking care of yourself. Well, if doctors aren't taking care of themselves and they're not doing well in terms of their own well-being, then they're not going to be able to take care of their patients.
Yeah, if you can't keep the lights on or wake up in the morning, you're not helping anybody.
Right. Well, that too. And just even your mental well-being, right? So if we're not, feeling good and feeling positive, then how are we going to have empathy for someone who's going through something difficult? So unfortunately, a lot of psychiatrists choose not to take insurance and choose to kind of do things, around all that paperwork, and that unfortunately causes issues with access.
Yeah. What other barriers are you seeing in terms of getting your patients the care that they need?
I think in this city, it's been that reproductive psychiatry and women's mental health is just now kind of taking off, I feel, in the last 5 to 10 years. So there's still there's still a lot of trouble with getting people access to see anyone. So, if someone has money, then that's one thing. It's easier to get them into therapy and easier to get them in to see a psychiatrist or get them, the right OB or doula or midwife. But if somebody, is more dependent on their insurance, a lot of insurance companies aren't going to, help reimburse for these types of services. And so, it makes it really hard finding therapists who kind of specialize in this area or psychiatrists.
Have you found that there is also a social stigma associated with, a woman who can't handle it and has to go seek somebody to help?
Absolutely.
Well, not to mention the fact that, we're talking primarily about women's issues, about reproductive issues, and then all that stuff is icky and gross, and we don't.
And why would we want to care about that?
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that stuff at all.
Yeah, if you look on social media, you have these moms who post, them looking perfect and their children looking perfect. And
they're wonderful birth stories.
Yes. It was beautiful. And in reality, a lot of people don't have that experience, and then they feel shamed for the, ambiguous thoughts that they might have, or, just not having a good experience or not feeling immediately in love with their baby. And there's definitely still a lot of shame around it. And I think for me, I'm kind of in it so much that when I have a patient come to me with kind of worrying about the stigma of taking medication or worrying about doing therapy, it almost kind of shocks me because I'm not in that culture as much anymore. But it is very much still alive. And I think luckily there's been more, outspoken, social media and blogs and people kind of talking more about this. And I'm hoping that culture will change soon.
Yeah, it does feel in a lot of ways like your practice is sort of on the frontier of a culture war. Because, I mean, even just today, somebody I am friends with on Facebook posted about the anniversary of their miscarriage and then immediately took it down and posted something else about all of the criticism and all of the thoughts that went into that of her wanting to truly mourn that death, even a few years out. And people were like, it wasn't even a real baby. You never even met it. And, being incredibly disrespectful in that way.
Yeah, that's so tough. Yeah, I mean, I think that, now there's kind of all these hashtags around postpartum depression and things like that are helping women feel more comfortable with coming out and voicing, yes, I've gone through this too, or it's okay that I'm having these feelings, or it's okay that I'm having this experience, and that there are so many different experiences, and just because yours wasn't the same as your mom's or your aunt's or your friends doesn't mean that it was a wrong or bad experience.
Mm-hmm. So you do feel like things are trending in the right direction?
I think so. And I don't know if that's just because I'm in it so much or if that's reality, but I think that I'm seeing that. Definitely here in Austin.
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So do you guys want to take another call?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's try Lee. Lee, you are on the air.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I wanted to talk about reproduction rights. Women's rights and reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
As you may know, the United States just vetoed a UN resolution about rape and reproduction rights and violence against women.
I hadn't caught that story. Can you walk us into it just a little bit?
Yeah, there was some statistics that I really wanted to get to. Everybody probably familiar with Boko Haram, who kidnapped and raped thousands of girls, and how they forced pregnancy by their captors. And over 800 women or girls die every day due to complications of pregnancy and birth.
Yeah, I believe that.
About right, yep.
Yeah, what kind of questions come to mind for you?
Lee? Well, I'm going to pop
think
you
we may
back
have
on
lost
hold
them, and
there.
we'll come back.
Yeah. We did have another caller. Let's go ahead and take, is it Taryn?
Oh, hello?
Hello.
Hey, what's on your mind tonight?
One moment here. I'm trying to get somewhere. Oh, hi. So yes, I am calling about how much I appreciate your show so much.
Oh,
Hey, glad to hear it.
thank you.
Yeah, and for me, it's really special because I have really, for one, I'm trans, so you already know all the baggage that comes with that, but this show has really helped me a lot, and I just wanted to show my appreciation by calling in and just saying how much this organization and everything that you do is not in vain, because it probably in some days has really saved me in some ways, because I've had a history of being obviously on the verge, suicidal ideation, and this has really helped ground me, and I just really wanted to thank you guys for that. I didn't really have much to discuss besides that.
Well, fair enough.
Well, thank you.
Glad to hear it, and I really do appreciate you sharing that with us. And if there's anything, I'm sorry, I just want to say if there's anything in particular that that stood out for you, that's been really helpful for you, or that honestly you'd just like to see more of, we'd love it if you shot us an email and just kind of let us know what we can be doing better and what we can be doing to help folks like you that are really struggling from some of the bullshit in our culture.
Yeah, I'm not on my own yet, so I'm 18, but I'm about to graduate from high school and stuff and move out, so I'm still trying to find my way. But also, you guys on the topic of reproductive medicine and such, I was actually listening in and I was like, whoa, that's a really good topic to talk about. And I just love that you guys come at it with unabashed, willingness to talk about it. That's great. And for me, I don't know about you, but I was, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but for me, I'm going to probably try and go into transgender healthcare. That's kind of my hope, but I don't know. We'll see, because med school's a lot of work, and I don't know if I could take all the chemistry, but, I hope to at least maybe one day open my own practice, or maybe an insurance company for trans people to get, and all the surgeries they need, because it's so expensive, and a lot of insurance companies to be honest, they F all trans people over, and they don't cover, or they cover part of the cost, or whatever, something goes, and it's just like we get discriminated against, and there needs to be a solution to this, and I think that I wish that I could find other people that or surgeons already that were doing this, so I could be like team up with them or whatever, but it's obviously a lot of networking and a lot of practice and such, but that's kind of what I was talking about if we're talking on the subject of healthcare, so just thought I would mention that.
Yeah, well,
that
good
sounds
luck to you.
amazing.
There was actually an article I just read about at Mount Sinai. They just opened a transgender psychiatry fellowship.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Really?
So I'm really interested
I'll look
to see
into that.
Yeah, how that plays out.
Yeah, we need that. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I'm going to look that up right now.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. We really love hearing from you and other listeners or watchers, viewers, about how much maybe us just sitting here once a week might actually be helping some people. Us just sitting here talking about random topics like we sit around the table most of the days might actually be helping some people. So thank you.
You don't understand, because, trust me, back in 2015, 2014, when I was coming away from religion and all that, I was starting to listen into, this whole community of, atheists and such, and I was like, oh my God, and there was just something there, and I think this community probably saved my life, because I've been hospitalized once, almost for committing suicide, and I have a friend from school that tried to, but obviously they're fine now. Luckily, they got the help they needed before anything too bad happened, and that's another thing that we really, I think, as a trans community, is we need to address, is the high suicide rates, because
Overwhelmingly high, yeah, absolutely.
It's 40%. It's 1 in 4, and it's just that's according to the National Center for Trans Equality in DC, and that's just too much. And I'm a geek on this stuff, so I could pretty much, I can go on and on about how much this irritates me and how somebody needs to address this. So anyway, sorry.
Oh, no, by all means. But thank you so much for calling in, and I hope that we can do another episode soon on, just gender in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'll listen in for that for sure.
Hey, well,
Great.
glad to hear it. Thank you so much for calling.
Okay, thank you so much. And you don't even know how you're saving lives, just doing what you do. Thank you so much.
Hey, glad to hear it. And I guess I would say again to Taryn and to everybody else, if there is something we've done or haven't done that worked really well, or you just haven't seen yet, we'd love to hear about it. If you have a recommendation for a topic or an issue that you're wanting to see addressed, we would love to try and to bring that content to you. We want to get the word out on a lot of these things, because I think one of the main reasons we do this show is because there are so few corners of the internet that are addressing some of these really important topics. So we'd love to cast the spotlight where it needs to be. So help us out.
And let's see here. We have Lee back. Lee, can you hear us now?
Yeah, I'm sorry that my headset went out.
Oh, okay. So go ahead and take us back to where we left off.
Yeah, the UN resolution that the United States decided to veto against rape and violence in women in war. I think it's atrocious of the United States that we would do that.
And I would have to agree with you.
On with that, I was wondering, since we have the doctor there, and I know that she's a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, but wondering about if she said that she saw women that had depression issues, and I wonder if she gets cases where possibly women are conflicted about maybe wanting a career and worried about the time clock running out.
Absolutely. That's been a thing that's shown up in my office a lot. I think as women, we've kind of been given a lot more opportunities in the last, 30, 50 years of, getting more equality in terms of jobs, although that still could use a lot of work, but kind of having more opportunities to go to school and hold jobs equal to men. And with that comes, the whole fertility and reproduction and having to push off having kids. And unfortunately, a lot of women aren't told that, okay, well, your fertility starts declining in your early 30s, and that's around the time that maybe they want to start having, kids, or maybe even just start having a relationship, and really kind of empowering women to understand their own fertility rights and their own knowledge on their body, while still being able to have a career and still being able to advance like they want to. It's definitely something that I see quite often, and it's sad. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of people trying to do advocacy work around that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, being a non-cisgendered female, that question comes to mind, and I know women that I've seen in my life that are conflicted about that. Then I wonder also, since we are in the medical age now, where we can, help with reproduction problems, do you see a cost basis, or are we past that where a woman really doesn't have to worry, if she's able to conceive, then, you know what I'm saying? Or do you have women that come in with cost concerns?
With cost concerns?
Yeah, and not being able to get pregnant.
Right. Yes. Yes, definitely. And unfortunately, the cost of fertility treatments and, doing in vitro fertilization or just even freezing eggs is very high. And I think that's another thing that they're not planning on or not taught about.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we got a long ways to go. Here in the United States, we have advanced medical, but we still aren't doing the best we can.
Yeah,
Right.
providing access to these things for everybody.
Right. I think insurance still has a long way to go.
The technology is there, but the access is not.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity this evening to get on here and chat with you all.
It was lovely hearing from you again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling. You have a great night.
Goodbye.
Yeah, I'd have to say that back when I currently can't have kids, and that was a choice of mine. But back in the days where it was a possibility, the idea, because there have been some issues in my family's history, that, what if I did have to have these procedures, and how much was it going to cost, and could I afford it? And then, not only are you dealing with the cost of getting pregnant, then you're dealing with the cost of being pregnant, and then dealing with the cost of having a child. And so if you're having to pay in just to reach the point of getting pregnant, you're already kind of a step behind.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that our government is set up, we don't have any kind of security once we get pregnant and then have the baby. Then you have to take a break from your job, and then, that might mean you're most likely not making any kind of income.
Paid paternity leave in this country.
Right.
And,
Right.
all of that.
I find that the government is really good at telling you what you should do up until the moment you have or I shouldn't say telling you what to do. It's really great at telling you
Restricting your options.
Restricting your options and basically providing support to you up until the moment you have the baby. And then you're kind of like, well, sink or swim, you're on your own.
Yep.
And I think those options need to be expanded.
I agree.
That being said, what advice do you have for our viewers who are voters or who are looking to donate money or just support people struggling with these issues?
I think in terms of donations, in terms of support, I think really kind of supporting our local organizations. Especially here in Austin, I think PPHA does a lot of work, and they have a lot of programs where they can help women with gaining access to therapy or gaining access to mental health services and doulas, and a lot of women, I think, are still stuck in the stigma of it all. And then by the time that they're really desperate for help, they might not have thought of the ways to get help or planned for the cost of that help. So I think kind of supporting local businesses and local organizations, at least here in Austin, is a necessary thing.
Good to hear.
So would you like to take a last caller for the evening?
Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't heard from Min in a little while. Hello, Min. How are you?
I'm all right. Hello, Megan, Christy. Hello, Dr. Kristin.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hello. What did you have for us tonight?
Today, since Kristin is on the show, I would love to ask you about postpartum depression. Since you treat women with that symptom, then so do you think it is a medical condition, or do you think it's like a cognitive behavior problem?
So I have a hard time separating out medical conditions from cognitive conditions, and then to me the brain and the central nervous system are an organ in the body, and so just like any other organ in the body, it can falter and malfunction. So in that respect, to me, it's medical and cognitive. In pregnancy, our hormones drastically change. We get a bunch of estrogen and a bunch of progesterone, and those two hormones have direct influence on our central nervous system. Not to get too medical with everything, but that influences kind of the neurotransmitters and all of the neurological processes that are going on a more biological level in our brain. And once those things are ripped away after a woman has a baby and has a placenta, those hormones are ripped away in our brain as well. And so that really kind of alters the whole chemical balance inside of the brain. And, just in a healthy individual whose brain is functioning normally, it's very common for them to have like baby blues. So I think the 80 to 90% of women experience baby blues, where they're just crying at, things that they wouldn't normally cry at, and their behaviors and emotions are just way off from what they normally are. And so you can imagine in a brain that is already, having some dysfunction, that shift in chemicals would really make things a lot more difficult for them to handle kind of everyday things. And then on top of that, having a new child, especially for, and first-time moms, or, even second-time, third, having a new way of life and having to adjust to that is a huge stressor, and that in itself kind of increases the risk for mental illness as well.
Mm. Yeah. So the reason I bring up the question is because I grew up in Vietnam, and in my country, I have never seen any women or any person, for that matter, have sort of like the depression that is like reported by the medical community.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that more often when I immigrated to the U.S. And later on, when I checked the living condition of both societies, I see that in my home country, usually when a woman gave birth, there was a whole support from the family, not just the husband, but the mother, the father, and the sister, brother, etc. And so I think like probably that's give the woman like a sense of she's not alone, and she does not go through this by herself. And later on, when I came to this country, I read about Stoic philosophy, and basically it said that you cannot control the external environment, but you can control your reaction to or your feelings. And like Asian people are known to be good at that because they don't have the luxury to seek out psychologists or psychiatrists to treat their mental issues, so they have to reason themselves out of the problem that they have. So that's why I wonder, like if there's problem with women who have depression after birth, is it because the society we're living in is more individualistic, and that gives her a sense like she's had to go through the problem on her own? Then that's feed on that mindset, and then it intensifies the problem, or is it really like there's something like chemically in the brain that cause the symptom worse?
Yeah, so
does that make sense?
No, absolutely, that definitely makes sense. And to kind of start with the chemical, biological piece of it, whenever we go through any kind of stress, stress, the environment is altered different from what it was, and we're having to adjust to that. There is a biochemical process that goes on in our body where stress hormones go up to kind of, move around different energy sources so that we can manage and deal with the new change in the environment. So having a baby is a stressful situation where our hormones are, our stress hormones are changing, and stress in itself is a risk factor for bringing on mental illness. So when you have a stressful situation, you're already biologically kind of altered in a way that you're more prone to experiencing those symptoms. And then on top of that, to what you're speaking to with the way that our culture is, we are very individualized, and that's very opposite of what we're used to. So we're very social creatures. Our brain is, has evolved to kind of be used to having that social support. And in other cultures where they have been around their family, they've seen, maybe their sisters being pregnant and have babies. They've been around their nieces and nephews. They kind of already know what to expect. They know, kind of the different experiences that have gone on. We don't get that in our culture. And then on top of that, you have the baby and then your family's not there. And so not only do you not have the experience already of what it's like to have a baby and what it's like to go through all this, but then you don't have other people around who have gone through that either. And so you're alone in that experience. And, essentially, I feel like in this day and age, if you don't have the money to hire people to help you, and your mom's working and your sister's working, and really it's nobody but you who can kind of take care of the baby. That would be not only a very stressful situation, but also, isolating. And like I said earlier, our brain is not developed for that.
There's also that stigma around, not being able to do it yourself.
Right.
And there's that, I think as women, we put this expectation on ourselves that we should be able to just do it all ourselves. And really, that's not how we evolved. We did not physically evolve that way, and we did not socially evolve that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to remember, too, all you women out there.
And I think to kind of speak to, some of the Asian cultures. So I'm part Chinese, I'm half Chinese, and in that culture, it's very much kind of, you don't necessarily talk about it as much, and you kind of, work through it and do it on, get it done, don't complain. But I think then in the Asian culture, we see a lot more of somatic disorders. And so maybe it's not that they're verbalizing it or it's coming out in that way, but coming out in other ways. Your body has to kind of manage those stressors in one way or another. And so that's, another thing that we see with Asian cultures.
So Dr. Kristin, then when you treat a woman who suffer depression, then I guess what I want to know is like, do you like help, like try to get the help from the family first and try to make them think, like rewire their thinking in a more like positive mode, like before you resort to like treating them with medication, right?
Right. So unfortunately, by the time that women get to me, it's usually more severe. So usually their family has already been there and trying to be supportive. Usually I'm the last straw because a lot of women don't want to take medication. And I think for some it's seen as like a failure, like nothing else worked. And so here I am. So for me, if the family isn't already involved, that's usually because that's not an option, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Men,
All right. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I hope that helped answer your questions this evening.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So before I go, I want to know, like, if do you write any books or any article I can read? On your website?
On my website, I do kind of review other articles that have been written under the reads section on my website. I don't have time to write other articles yet, but maybe one day.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. See you.
Yeah, to his question, do you see particularly postpartum depression being kind of culturally bound? Have you seen any research about that or just experienced that in your practice?
I do think it is a little bit more culturally bound, and I don't, in my practice, I don't know if that's because in some cultures it's, it's even more stigmatized.
Yeah.
So, for example, for Black women, it's very stigmatized to, they need to be strong and they're supposed to kind of have this, this characteristic.
Almost superwoman.
Right. And so for them, it's, there's not the support to go and get help. But I think also in terms of just looking at other countries, I think part of the issue is that we are so isolated now and, we move around to different states or, areas of the country and we're far away from our family. And now, people are working later in their careers and, yeah, we just don't have the support that maybe you would have in another country.
And could it also be that what we call postpartum depression is just a certain set of symptoms and a different set of symptoms would just be called something else, the way that it's presenting itself? As you said, in other cultures, there are other more what do you call them? You said
somatic.
Symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, I think for women who are experiencing, really moderate to severe postpartum depression, it kind of looks the same no matter where they are, no matter what country or what.
Things escalate to a certain level.
Right. The depression kind of looks the same in all cultures, but I think for some, kind of that baby blues or period of time where you're adjusting to your hormones, maybe for some cultures that could look abnormal compared to ours.
Gotcha. Oh, nice. I mean, not nice, but good to know. So, Christy, did you have anything else before we wrap up?
No, that's really everything. I, of course, want to remind everybody that we'll include in the footnotes some of the organizations and things that Kristin has recommended. Is there anything else that you would just like to take the opportunity to say to anybody who's watching before they come into your office or before things get to that level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just like any kind of medical issue, prevention is key. And so it's never a bad idea to start planning for pregnancy if you already have a mental illness or you've already struggled with depression and anxiety. Kind of putting things into place and planning ahead is always a great idea. Unfortunately, I think it's like 50% of the pregnancies aren't planned, so it's not always an option. But I think, kind of playing into the whole stigma thing of a lot of women not wanting to come in, I think really challenging those thoughts that prevent you from getting help is important because ultimately at the end of the day, it's about, your baby and the health of your baby. And we know that mental illness in pregnancy and postpartum is very detrimental to the child's development. And so I think, at least just do it for the baby.
That's a great message. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank y'all.
And Christy, with that, would you like to take us out with our normal outro?
Yeah. Well, like I said, everything will be in the footnotes, and I definitely want to just put a shout out to Kristin's Instagram, which is just the Reproductive Psychiatrist. I'm at Valence Counseling. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And
I'm always at the ACA.
Yeah. Megan's here at the ACA. And I suppose whether it's in America or in Vietnam, help me out here.
Whether it's with a big belly or with a baby in your arms.
Hey, good call.
Well, maybe, wait, no, I know where this is going. Whether it's with a big belly or a baby in the crib next to the bed. There we go.
With a doula or with a psychiatrist? No, never mind that one. Regardless
so she
of
has
how
no
you
idea
do
where
it,
this is going.
Regardless of how you do it, we just want to encourage everybody out there to give themselves a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Bye.